Hello, everybody, and welcome, as always, to TradeGate Hub's morning market update. Of course, I am your host, Eliman Dambell, and thank you for taking the time to join this session here today. And I hope everyone has had a great weekend. And essentially, we are going to have quite a lot to talk about today. An interesting week ahead as far as the markets, essentially, what we always see, especially in certain markets on the back of a weekend, especially in crypto and a few others, you tend to see a lot of moves. And boy, have we seen some moves. So we will be going through some of this and these throughout the course of this session. Before we do get into the agenda, before we do begin and commence with the session here today, as always, just please take some time to go through the description of this live stream, in which you will find a risk warning. Please consume the risk warning again before commencing with the session. But guys, as far as today, there's no better place to start off than cable GBP USD, of course, for those of us who were here on Friday. There was a lot we were looking at as far as what could potentially happen in cable. If you remember, we asked ourselves the question, especially in relation to that red candle you could see after the session. This is what transpired. But previously, we saw some uncertainty. We saw the markets moving back to that 142 level, but we asked ourselves the question: was it able to sustain that breakout? Was it able to continue into those 2.5 year highs? Would it be able to break out of that level? Unfortunately, we saw that was not the case. Essentially, the markets remained within that 2.5 months, I should say. But unfortunately, the cable rate did not break out. Looking at the RSI, you could see, and this is why I always say the RSI is one of the main indicators that I use, of course, in addition to the moving averages, in addition to others. But yes, we saw it break out initially, but then looking at history, showing us a lot of bearish activities taking place at that level. And again, at the time as well, if you look closely to the moving averages, you could see there was the potential for some consolidation. So it was not a surprise that this candlestick essentially did form. So for anyone who was involved in that, absolutely great trade. And since then, again, what we are essentially seeing in cable is what we have been seeing for a while, just consolidation. When we do have these moves, you are having, sells at resistance and buys at support. So even as early as now, in the last few hours, you are seeing some rallies taking place there at 141.39, essentially taking us back towards that 41.92 level. So could that be the next stop, or are we going to see further rallies and rises or increases in the rate there? For today, from a fundamental perspective, there isn't too much happening today as far as highly important economic announcements. You do have some in the way of speeches from some members of the Fed and stuff like that. But generally, tomorrow is where we're going to see some news come out of the US as far as consumer confidence. So that could absolutely have an impact on the cable rate, especially considering the last month's retail sales figures. Of course, retail sales in the US account for 2/3 of GDP. So as far as retail sales, we saw them pretty much remain unchanged. We saw retail sales last month in the US remain unchanged. So the question is, how will the Chicago Board's Consumer Confidence Index be impacted by this? Are we essentially going to see a declining consumer confidence index, or essentially how will this potentially come out? And based on that, we could potentially see a strengthening or a weakening of the dollar. From a technical perspective, how it's currently positioned, again, paying attention to that RSI, we are at 53, pretty much 54 at the moment. So it is essentially closer to being overbought. But again, just looking at that trajectory, and even with the moving averages, it does look relatively bullish. Is it essentially trying to head back towards those 60 levels? And if that does happen, where will we see the rate? Are we heading back to 142? So it's an absolutely interesting one. It just seems like it's not going away. It's not going away. So we are seeing these falls, but it keeps coming back up. It keeps coming back up. It's attempting to come back up. So are we stuck in a bearish tide? Or are we just seeing, because in a sense you are seeing higher highs and even higher lows. So you see, I don't know, higher highs there, higher highs there, higher highs there. And in that process, you see the lows as well. You have those higher lows as well. So are we going to see essentially this trend? You could even call it somewhat of an equidistant channel, but are we going to see that trend continue upwards, taking us to somewhere around there next as a support and resistance? So that's cable, great one to start off with for those of us looking at the forex side of things. But moving on swiftly, looking at gold. Now with gold, we're seeing similar. Of course, if you remember on Friday, we were waiting for the manufacturing numbers, and essentially, I believe manufacturing came in. What did it come in? It came in at 61. So the IHS market index. PMI flash index came in at, I believe it was 61.4. 61.4. And generally above 50 signals growth, below 50 signals contraction as far as the particular reading of that index. So essentially we are seeing growth in US manufacturing. And hence why we saw a lot of looking there at Friday. Essentially at the moment we're seeing markets somewhat unchanged, but looking there at Friday, you saw a rally, yes, taking us towards those 1891 levels, but a lot of uncertainty as well. So we are seeing gold prices, even though they are rising and have been rising, let's say in the last 6, 7, or even last 10 days, overwhelmingly, we have seen a lot of bullish trends coming from gold. We are seeing somewhat of a slowdown in the last 4 or 5 days. Even prices are increasing, but you are seeing those dojis, that level of uncertainty is starting to grow. And in saying that, look where the uncertainty currently lay. Essentially, we are seeing, just look, it does look like it has, I don't know, somewhat walked into the lines then, and we are looking at the potential of the bear's nest, or however you want to call it. It is in the midst of a lot of bears. Look at all of these bearish candles and bearish runs which have taken place pretty much in the same level in which we are now. So is this current doji the sign of uncertainty which is currently unraveling as we speak? Is that just a sign of what is to come? Looking at the moving averages, absolutely, we have had the crossover, 10, 25, and 50. We've had that triple, that death cross, however you want to call it, that has already happened. Some may have potentially believed that this could continue towards the 1900s, 1964. We see a resistance there. Realistically, if we bring that down slightly, you also have some resistance there at 1916 also. So that could absolutely be a possibility, depending on some of the announcements tomorrow or even later on. So that could be a move if you are, I don't know, one of the bulls in the room. But if you are a bull in the room, it would probably be short term, because even if it does somewhat reach that level there, 1916, look what awaits. So if you imagine there's some bears where we are now, they just only increase in size the higher up you go. Look at those moves there. That's where the selling really takes off. So you could see some short-term bulls taking you to 1916, but then you may have some huge bears waiting in the wings, hoping to repeat a move as such. And if you look at the moving averages as well, that 10 EMA there in red, where it's currently positioned. So it's not there as of yet, but you can see the positioning is somewhat similar. Could it be time for what goes up to eventually come down? So that would be an interesting one to pay attention to. Of course, gold has definitely been one of the beneficiaries of, I would say May in general has been quite, how would I describe this? May, the data that we've seen released from the US in May could have been better. Let's put it that way. Of course, we had manufacturing came in good. NFP essentially came in, I don't know, worse than expected. We saw retail sales worse than expected. So a lot of key variables, a lot of key indicators there in the US from an economic standpoint, from a fundamental perspective, have essentially come out worse than expected. So if this continues, then absolutely. Some of the bulls who believe this could be continuing towards the mid 1900 could absolutely be right. But if the tide starts to turn, and pay attention to the date, essentially we have, I don't know, another week or so of May. But if we start to see, starting tomorrow, if we start to see news coming out of the US a bit more positive, we may start to see prices of gold trickle down. This is a daily time frame, but if you look, and we aren't going to do so, look at the weekly, you may have a different perspective. But for me at the moment, I'm looking at 1916. 1916, I believe it may just drag itself to 1916. And I think thereafter, and if you pay attention to the RSI as well, yeah, it has broken out, but similar to what we saw with cable earlier on, and even there historically, you do have some false breakouts which turn bearish. So it may take us to somewhere, even let's say around there, where you've had some slight resistance, which would probably be 1916. And I think then thereafter, you may see the tides turn. Already overbought. But could it go up just an inch more? So that's gold. I wanted to spend a bit more time on gold because I know quite a lot of you are interested in the metal. And of course, again, how can I forget to mention this? Some news out of China. China's cracking down and on commodity traders there as well. I was listening to earlier on Bloomberg, so you do see a crackdown in terms of commodity traders there in China. So if this continues, or if this magnifies, also how could this impact the price? So a lot to consider in relation to gold. But moving onwards to what some would call the digital gold, of course, Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin. I think just the size and and deep breath pretty much says it all. It's hard to really, and to be honest, like at this stage, this chart needs to somewhat be amended. I've been looking at this chart pretty much since it was, I don't know, Bitcoin was on 9K. So I probably need to do some new analysis on this. But in general, remember, on Friday we were asking the question, have we found a floor? The question we were asking on Friday is, have we found the floor? And of course, if you see, I don't know, the horizontal lines here on the RSI, which currently is at 41, so it is somewhat oversold. Okay, we need the RSI there. So we're currently oversold, but looking at that RSI, we asked the question, have we found a floor? Or is it essentially trying to make its way down towards the RSI level of 16? At the moment, you could say a floor has somewhat been found around 33K. You can see the second time it's reached this level in the last I don't know, 8 to 10 days. The markets have rallied once again at that floor, so a lot of bullish action is taking place, essentially preventing BTC USD from going to, let's say, below 30. So the markets have remained. Looking at the moving averages as well, you could see that initial bullish activity there. And this probably came from the very, very early entrants. Those who would have missed out in the past. Those who would have seen in January Elon Musk bought $1.5 billion worth of crypto. Those who would have seen the price go up and essentially bought at the top would be the same people, I believe, who would have bought here. Just imagining and believing that the decline in crypto prices gave them a discounted opportunity to re-enter the fray and buy the dip, so to speak. But I think buying the dip, you have two types. You have initially those, I don't know, who essentially, I believe, sacrifice themselves because the momentum, the tide clearly is going in one direction. And to try and fight that tide takes a very, very either naive or brave, however you want to look at it, depending on your spectacles. A very naive or brave investor, a very naive or for lack of a better phrase, stupid trader, because there's some tides you simply cannot fight. You need to appreciate, just from a common sense perspective, guys, we aren't going to see the markets drop down by 30% and just automatically rise in the days and weeks after. We're not going to see this. These things very, very rarely happen. And I don't know, somewhat my rant there, but we have to appreciate consolidation. Consolidation from a trading perspective is something that is part and parcel of this game of ours. It is going to come a stage where the market needs to draw breath, needs to have some uncertainty after moving in a particular direction, I don't know, for a significant amount of time, or dropping or increasing in value to a certain portion. There needs to be that space given for consolidation. So those who bought there, absolutely, if they left on time, but if you're still holding that trade, hoping for it to go back to 60K, just my condolences, because what you're seeing now and what you are going to be part of now is that consolidation, is that uncertainty, while the markets try to figure out their next destination. And it could even be lower. So this is what we're trying to figure out. Looking at the RSI, it's just breached 41. Again, a lot of uncertainty. Look at that. So for the majority of May, or more than half of May, we can see it has remained in that particular range for a while. We're back there again. Is it going to be able to break out and go back towards those 53s? And even if it does, you're probably going to see the markets get to 42K. So I think we're a long way from 60. We're probably a long way from 60K. I think this is going to be today. It's going to be one of the definitive junctures as far as the next sort of future direction of Bitcoin. Is it going to essentially attempt to rally further, or are we going to see more bears? Me personally, on first glance, this absolutely does look like a floor. On first glance, again, just zooming out, just moving on to a daily time frame, you could say, in a sense, it looks like a floor. Or is that the floor? Is that the floor, and is this just a subsection of what we believe to be the floor? So could we even be heading towards those levels there of around 29 or so? So it's an interesting one, but I think it's definitely one worth paying attention to. So we're absolutely oversold at the moment. So, and again, guys, what goes down will come up. So there's no doubting it. There's absolutely no ifs. There's no buts. There are no maybes. The price of crypto will rise again. There's no one's debating that. Of course, the only debate and the only thing that we don't know is when. Essentially, when we saw the markets, I don't know, have that fall back in, when was it, 2018, January of 2018, January to around March of 2018. It took 3 years for the rally to happen again. So these are the 4 years, actually. So we just don't know. Actually, I was probably right the first time. It was 3 years. So we just need to wait and see, and we need to be very, very cautious, especially when trading this. But it's an interesting one. It is set up. It's set up pretty nicely at the moment, even for a move like this. So even into... and I'm losing my ability to speak here, but it's set up similar to gold. Let me just quickly go back to gold, because if you remember with gold, we said, could it quickly head to 1916, then sell off? with Bitcoin, especially on a daily, could it be heading towards, I don't know, just below 30, around 29, then increase? Can you see somewhat? Look, I'm not saying there's a correlation between the two, but as far as a potential for further short-term bears, and you can see the bulls which really live at that level. So could we, if this isn't the floor, granting this isn't the floor, could we see further buys, some buy limits just at that level, hoping to get to 50, to 42. So that's an interesting one. But moving forward, guys, again, I spent quite a lot of time on Bitcoin and gold respectively, so I'm just going to move swiftly on with the others, starting off with the SPX. SPX again. Now this has bounced. This has bounced since we saw the markets hit that floor just over a week ago. Again, rising, consolidating. But again, I think paying attention to that RSI, I think that until this changes, until we see it truly break out of that 57 level, I don't think we're going to see an all-time high. When it finally does break out of 57, we're at 54 at the moment. When it finally breaks out of 57, I believe it may make a run towards 70, cementing a new ATH. So I think that's all I can really say with this. But at the same time, we are overbought. So who is to say, relatively speaking, we are closer to being overbought than oversold. So who is to say that this level isn't going to hold? Who is to say, and who is to ignore the fact that we have seen a lot of bears living in this area as well? So are we going to see, and zooming in, looking at the moving averages, yes, we have had somewhat of a downwards crossover. Is that going to continue to mature? Is that 10 EMA in red? Is that going to continue to fall, or is it going to stabilize and pick up? Again, we need to wait and see what the volume tells us before definitively trying to gauge. But let's quickly try to do so anyway in the shorter term time frames. Let me have a look at a H4, actually, a 4-hour time frame there. Again, you can clearly see that resistance there, which I think again is what we're seeing with the RSI as well. So if it does manage to break this, I do believe you will see a move like this transpire, just a bit higher, taking us again to that ATH. But again, 1, you could classify this as 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Potentially 7 question mark. Are we going to look at the 7th time that markets since, I don't know, the 7th of June or 11th of June have attempted to break out from this level and have failed? Are we going to see another failure take place today? Who knows? Maybe tomorrow's consumer confidence numbers could have some impact on this. So this is another interesting one to pay attention to. Swiftly moving on, but sticking with indices, looking at the UK Ftse 100, similar in a way. You are seeing some consolidation where we are now. RSI as well, somewhat just tracking along, not really going anywhere. I think the next key level, similar, could be above 70. Could we see a move like this transpire? But again, even if that does happen, guys, if you look very, very carefully at the R, so we are close to a resistance in any case. Just around, you could just see that level there, that level there, that level there. To a degree there. Could we already be there, or is it heading towards those levels already? So this, to be honest, looks a bit messy. I was earlier on in the year, it looked a bit more appealing, a bit more attractive. Looking at it now, I don't know if it's just me having to change my point of view. If you look at it a week, I'm still bullish. The Ftse, I do believe eventually it could be heading back towards this high, even 7,700 is my personal view at the moment. I think it's just waiting to see if it can break from this level of 64. But guys, if I held my breath on it breaking, 64 for the, I would have died 1,000 times if I held my breath or on the Ftse 100 from an RSI perspective. Breaking that 64 level, I probably would not. That's probably the reason why I can barely get a word out this morning. Because guys, it's been a few years. It's been a few years, especially on a weekly time frame. Oh wow, you're going back. Let's see how far this out. Guys, you're going back damn near 9 years. So it's been a long time. It's been a long time since we've seen the RSI above this level there. So is that essentially to say it will never happen again? Absolutely not. Just because it hasn't happened for 9 years, doesn't mean it will not happen. It may happen. It may be waiting for its 10th year before it finally breaks out. Who knows? But what I will say is, yes, it has taken up. I'm going to look at this in crude oil one, and we're probably going to call it quits there. The reason I wanted to draw breath there, guys, is sometimes you get lulled into a false sense of expecting, especially in indices, a false sense of expecting the markets to go up. We saw the drop, which took place, I don't know, March, April of last year. And since then, it's just been week after week after week after week after week of new highs. When is that going to stop? It stopped to a degree in the last few weeks. It stopped to a degree, but the overall momentum, and we're talking about momentum here, the overall momentum is still bullish. So you could see since that drop there, the overall momentum, it has been ascending. You can see that ascending triangle which took place since that move there in March. But when will that stop? When will there be a twist of fate? When will we see a change of momentum? Because we will. It will happen. But the question is when. Are we seeing the recent uncertainty, not only in the Ftse, but looking at the S&P as well? Are we seeing the potential for a change? And I don't know. And I think for me, this is why I love looking at TradeGate Hub and listening to the likes of Dale, listening to the likes of Mike, who are more in tune with the indices, with the equities. And I'm sure all of you and all of us watching this session will absolutely watch those sessions later on this afternoon just to have some more perspective. But this is an interesting one. This is an interesting one. There is a lot of uncertainty in certain markets as far as a lack of direction, and could that be the question I'll leave, and hopefully they can answer later on? Could that be because we are, I don't know, in the midst of a storm waiting? You can't be in the midst of a storm waiting to happen. But are we? I think you know what I'm trying to say. Are we essentially waiting, or looking at something which is just about to unravel? But let's move on. Let's move on there, because as you can see, first thing on a Monday, my choices of words and phrases. They're just does anyone have there's certain phrases you say out loud, and then you start to question yourself, like, does that phrase even make sense? I wouldn't get into now, otherwise we'll be here for a while longer. But we do need to shoot off. And shooting off, last one before I bid you farewell, crude oil. Crude oil, guys, again. And there's not so much to say about. Of course, on Friday we asked a question: could we be heading towards that lower tier of resistance, of support? I beg your pardon, of around 57. But again, it just continues to trade in that range, 60 to 60 to 67 to a degree. But for the most part, I would say 62, 63 to 67. So around the $4 or $5 range at the moment. Yeah, and I'm just waiting for OPEC with this. Of course, we knew Iran was planning on increasing supply. One of the reasons why we saw the price drop so rapidly there, but in dropping, it just came back to a floor where it has seen a lot of previous bulls take place there. So this is probably more of a technical buy than fundamental. But I think for me personally, I'm just waiting to see the fundamentals before we see any change of direction here. Real change of direction. But guys, really and truly, I don't think we will see one. We're already, I don't know, 6 months into the year, 5 months into the year. How many? Over half the population here in the UK have been vaccinated. In the US, things seem to be back to normal. I'm watching basketball games with a full house in the crowd and stuff like this. People are traveling. Of course, the situation in India and Asia isn't as great, but in general, you are seeing a lot of, I don't know, demand for crude oil, for energy start to come back. So if that is happening and we aren't seeing, and again, we're pretty much at pre-pandemic oil prices anyway. So really and truly, I think for the rest of the year, you are probably going to see at max that $10 range, 57 to 67. And I think the price of crude will probably just trade in between this for the remainder of 2021. But guys, that's my time. Again, great session. A lot of questions to ask ourselves. I'm in particular interested to see how gold and Bitcoin do today. And of course, we will be back on Wednesday and we will be able to recap, but also preview how we think it will do going forward. So guys, great session. I'll leave you to it. All the best, and make sure you lock into Dale and Mike V's session later on. All the best. Take care. Bye-bye.